Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden awarded Congressional Gold Medals to officers who defended the Capitol on January 6th, nearly 7 months to the day after the attack. Mr. Biden signed the bill into law this afternoon. 2 of the 4 medals go to the U.S. Capitol Police and D.C. Metropolitan Police Departments for their service during the insurrection. The other pair will be displayed at the Capitol and the Smithsonian Institution. Here's the message President Biden shared with the officers.
On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you, thank you, thank you for protecting our Capitol. Maybe even more importantly, for protecting our Constitution and saving the lives of duly elected members of the Senate and the House and their staffs. In these moments when we're still debating, these were tragic hours back then. You stood in the breach. You did your duty to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
More on that in a moment, but first, the Biden administration is taking more steps to encourage people in the U.S. to get vaccinated, whether they live here or not. The federal government is developing a plan to require foreign travelers to be vaccinated in order to enter the country. The policy is still in the works, but it's expected to have limited exceptions as COVID cases and new variants spread worldwide. With the new school year already underway in some parts of the country, the White House is also rolling out new efforts to get eligible students vaccinated. That includes sending pediatricians to back-to-school nights, asking about COVID vaccinations in sports physicals, and providing schools with resources to host pop-up vaccine clinics on campus. Here's what Education Secretary Miguel Cardona had to say to states that banned mask mandates in schools like Texas and Florida.
Don't be the reason why schools are interrupted. Our kids have suffered enough. Let's do what we know works. Let's do what we know works across the country. Educators know what to do. We did it last year. So I have calls out to those states, but at the end of the day, I want to work with Texas. I want to work with Florida. I want to make sure those students have access to in-person learning.
Nikole, Killion, and Christopher Cadelago join me now. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent, and Christopher is a White House correspondent for Politico. Welcome to you both. Nikole, let's start with where we began, with the Congressional Gold Medals for the police who defended the Capitol on January 6th. This was the result of months of negotiation on how to honor the officers. Why did it take so long to recognize them?
Well, there had been a lot of back and forth between the House and the Senate over exactly who should be honored and how. The Senate actually passed a measure some time ago to honor Officer Eugene Goodman. You will remember he famously, pushed lawmakers back when the rioters were coming up the stairs near the Senate chamber. And so the House wanted to broaden that out. They wanted to honor all of those who defended the Capitol that day. So there was a bit of back and forth over that. And then, of course, the House did ultimately pass a measure in June, but 21 Republicans objected to that because of some of the language in the legislation, because it referred to the riot as an insurrection and those who were a part of the mob as insurrectionists. So some Republicans took issue with that. And then, of course, we saw the Senate just this week bring up this resolution that passed unanimously again, which would honor not just the Capitol Police, but also Metropolitan Police and those who helped defend the Capitol. And I think also what's interesting to note, too, I did have an opportunity just last week to speak with Officer Harry Dunn, who was one of those police officers, U.S. Capitol police officers who defended the Capitol on the 6th. And he actually met with Leader Schumer last week to kind of get an update, where do things stand? And sure enough, not long after that meeting, we then saw, like I said, this past Tuesday, the Senate bringing up this bill.
Yeah, how is he doing, Nikole? I'm curious because we all remember that very compelling testimony by Officer Dunn recounting his experiences that day.
For the most part, he is holding up. I think he feels relieved to get that testimony off of his chest, as do many of the officers who testified last week before the Select Committee. But it also has come with some pushback. He has faced negative criticism since his testimony. In some cases, more racial slurs and messages following his testimony, which you'll recall he described that he received actually on the 6th in terms of confronting some members of the mob. But again, I think his hope, at least as far as these medals were concerned, is he felt that it would help boost morale. As we know, just earlier this week, we learned of 2 more D.C. Metropolitan Police officers who took their lives, who defended the Capitol on the 6th. So again, I think you can't underscore the mental health toll that this has really taken, not just on these officers, but everyone who was at the Capitol that day and who wasn't, who has ties to the Capitol. It really has a huge impact on the psyche of people who are very intimately engaged and work in this Capitol every day. So, I think this is certainly a moment of levity, of recognition.
Yeah, we look forward to that ceremony. All right, well, Chris, switching gears, earlier this afternoon, President Biden put out an executive order to use vehicle emissions regulations to shift the U.S. toward electric cars. So give us a sense here. How does this work exactly?
So I think one way to look at this in the big picture is it's really a marriage between economic policy and foreign policy and climate change policy. And one of the ways in which he's going to try to do this is basically to boost the number with the support of the automakers of electric vehicles that we have. It's a way to create jobs in the U.S. It's a way to bring down emissions. He specifically wants to strengthen auto mileage standards to the level that they were under former President Barack Obama. Those had been weakened during the Trump administration years. And there's also the jobs aspect to this and bringing more manufacturing to the United States. Right now, China sort of has a lock on the future of the auto industry, 70% of battery manufacturing happening there. And I think when you look at the foreign policy aspect that I mentioned, you have to look at a lot of the way that the president has been framing these issues, which is that this is really a grand test of democracies versus autocracies. And he's talked about needing to catch up with these other countries to prove that our economic system and our democracy can work. So he's doing it today with these auto standards. He's done it, as you know, many other ways with other orders and the legislation he's trying to pass. He's talked a lot about tying this into the bipartisan infrastructure bill that is being advanced right now in the Senate.
Well, Nikole, the electric car order is just a part of the ongoing climate efforts from the federal government. How much of an impact will the in-progress bipartisan infrastructure bill have on environmental efforts as it makes its way through Congress?
Well, there are definitely some provisions in this bipartisan package that address climate, and that is something that many Democrats insisted on. While it doesn't include all of the president's, targets and ambitions here, the primary focus is on clean energy and climate resilience. So there are billions of dollars that have been allocated to, for instance, make schools and ports and other structures better able to withstand extreme weather events, additional funding for agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as FEMA to help with things like flood control, as well as, dealing with flood damage and providing more funding for some of those types of programs, and also providing more money, for instance, to agencies like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to help them, for instance, with restoring coastal habitats and coastal communities. So there are a number of climate considerations that were taken into account. And the White House notes that this is really just kind of a building block or first step, because we certainly do know that they intend to put more effort and energy into additional climate provisions in that broader $3.5 trillion package. We haven't seen the final details of that as of yet, but that is a top priority for that package, in order to try to meet some of the president's other targets.
Well, Chris, you have some new reporting on why the Biden administration thinks it can keep progressive Democrats in their corner on this bipartisan infrastructure bill, despite the cuts to the much more expansive original version. What did you learn after a week of intense pressure over the CDC's eviction moratorium?
So one of the big things I think we learned, particularly from the progressives and the Democrats in the House who were pushing this, the White House to act on this moratorium, is that outside pressure can work. This is something that the White House clearly listened to, and I think it's something that progressive leaders looked at as an act of good faith and something that they saw as the White House basically doing the right thing. When you look at this next part of the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better agenda, as the White House calls it, it is loaded down with a number of things that progressives like. We don't have anywhere close to a final price tag or the details, as I know we've mentioned, of this bill, but it is looked at as just the sheer size of the package as it's being discussed right now at 3.5 trillion, has things that folks are very happy about. And the alternative is to not support the president's agenda, not support the party's agenda, things like childcare and elder care and all the climate provisions I know that we've talked about. And so part of this is the reality of the situation where folks see this as coming down. It's the White House's priority. It's Democrats' priority. It has been for quite some time. And I think standing in the way of that, which is something folks have suggested, using leverage to try to get what they want in this package, is not necessarily going to be the approach they will take on this reconciliation bill. Now, post-reconciliation, I think, is where we really get to the moment where there are so many issues out there, from immigration to gun control to voting rights, where folks are really looking at how hard the White House is going to push, how much the president is going to push on moderate Democrats to act on these things. And I think that is where we're going to see some more points of tension. But these two bills in our reporting, this first bipartisan infrastructure bill and then this Build Back Better agenda, certainly Democrats appear from the leadership to the progressive leadership like they're falling in line.
Meantime, Chris, President Biden and Vice President Harris met with leaders from Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander civil rights organizations. What was on the agenda? What was discussed at that meeting?
So you'll recall a couple months ago when the president went down to Atlanta and spoke, there was obviously, over the COVID pandemic, been a rash of hate crimes against Asian Americans from multiple communities. And I think that was something that the president had focused on earlier in the year, had pledged to focus on. Now we have a number of priorities from communities out there that they really want to tie to the agenda in Washington. And one of them, which I just discussed, was voting rights. I mean, I know folks in this meeting made direct appeals to the president about the growth of Asian communities in the country, and even pointed to the 2020 election. Just over the last few years, these communities have grown. Indian American communities, other Asian American communities, and I think that's the point they were trying to make. I know we often see voting rights in the way it affects these communities, but that was a point that folks wanted to make to the president. Obviously, immigration is another one. So this is an opportunity to talk directly to the president, the vice president, obviously the highest ranking Asian American in U.S. government, and put their concerns out there and really press them on what they're going to do about these things, how they're going to get these things passed. On voting rights, we know about all the bills that are moving through, Republican bills that are moving through legislatures. We know about concerns with redistricting. And so people feel like it's not so much the politics of this, it's the policy, and they want to hear from the president how he's going to act.
And Nikole, we are going to have more on voting rights coming up here, but we are seeing signs that the Senate could take another attempt at voting legislation this week. What do we know about that?
Yeah, well, the details still remain to be heard and seen, but we do know behind the scenes that there have been some discussions about potentially trying to bring something up before the August recess. Many activist groups have been here on the Hill, if not daily, certainly weekly, to try to press Congress to act, especially in light of some of these redistricting changes that could occur later this year, in addition to also many of these restrictive proposals and legislation that's making its way through state legislatures across the country. So the latest that we know at this point in time is, like I said, those discussions continue, and it's kind of unclear what form this may take, whether that means putting some type of election infrastructure measures into the care infrastructure package, that $3.5 trillion budget resolution and reconciliation package that will follow this bipartisan infrastructure bill, or whether that is carving out a narrower piece of legislation, that's not as wide-ranging as that For the People Act, something a little more targeted. There have been kind of discussions about that, but again, we haven't seen any kind of legislative text, not even any draft language, so it's unclear exactly, what lawmakers would like to do, but it seems leadership is willing potentially to bring this up again. So, of course, we'll continue to update that situation. We do know over on the House side as well that they are also trying to ready the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act potentially for this fall. We are expecting potentially even as early as tomorrow that we'll get a little more information there as far as kind of where things stand in the House and how they hope to proceed. But certainly the plan on the House side was to try to expedite some of that legislation and to try to take it up in early fall. And again, this would address the Voting Rights Act, strengthening provisions in the Voting Rights Act. So both chambers working actively on this issue, as many activists have been calling for.
Right, activists who say that this is really an urgent concern for them that they want to see addressed very quickly. Nikole, Killion, and Christopher Cadelago, thank you very much.